30,000 Romans encountered up to 44,000 Macedonians at Pydna and won in less than an hour. Ancient tale defined the Macedonian phalanx as an unbeatable wall of spears. But on the day it collapsed under Roman pressure, the scale of the Roman victory marked a turning point in Mediterranean power. Welcome to Disturbing Tale, your daily history channel where we share the incredible stories behind ancient battles. If you're new, subscribe so you don't miss more heroic moments like Pydna. Because what happened here didn't just decide one battle. It signified the end of Macedonian independence and the rise of Rome as the supreme power in the Greek world. Let's begin. At this time, Rome had already crushed Carthage in the Punic Wars and was starting to expand east. That expansion eventually brought them face to face with Macedonia, the last strong kingdom of the Antigonid dynasty, whose roots went all the way back to Alexander the Great. The Hellenistic world, Alexander's old empire, was fragmented and weakened by now, and outside powers could really push around these states. Even places like Pergamum and Rhodes, which were technically allies, often had to call in Rome just to keep Macedonia in check. Basically, Rome found itself in the role of the regional power broker, and they were more than happy to use that position to tighten their grip and expand their influence. So, here's the deal with King Perseus of Macedonia. He was Philip V's ambitious son. And the moment he took the throne in 179 BC, he made it clear he was not a fan of Rome. Right away, he started rallying Greek city-states and even reached out to some Germanic tribes, trying to stir up anti-Roman sentiment across the region. Some of his moves were pretty bold, like marching his army to Delphi and expanding his influence in Thrace and Uria. And naturally this set off alarm bells for Rome's allies like Aemon II of Pergamum. Aemonides even gave a fiery speech to the Roman Senate accusing Perseus of aggressive designs, basically saying he was gearing up for war. That speech helped push things toward the Third Macedonian War. A Roman delegation told Perseus to back down or basically give up his independence. And guess what? Perseus refused. Boom. Rome declared war. At first, the war didn't really go either way. Rome scored a few small victories, sure, but they also ran into a serious setback at the Battle of Callinicus in 171 BC, where Perseus' cavalry beat a Roman force. That win boosted his reputation big time. After that, things kinda stalled. Perseus dug in along the LPS River, picking a spot that was basically a nightmare for anyone trying to attack. The river itself acted like a natural barrier. Anyone crossing it would be slowed down and exposed. Add in the surrounding hills and narrow mountain passes, and the Macedonians could funnel attackers into tiny, predictable areas where they couldn't maneuver. On top of that, Perseus's phalanx was packed with those insanely long cisses, forming a wall of spears that was almost impossible to get through. For the Romans, this was a nightmare. Their manipular legion system thrived on flexibility, moving, rotating troops, exploiting gaps. But here, all that advantage was nullified. A frontal attack would have meant charging through a bottleneck under missile fire straight into a wall of spears while the Macedonians rained missiles down from the hills. Paulus knew it, so he wasn't about to throw thousands of men into a likely slaughter. For 2 years, the war basically became a tense stalemate. The Romans tried different approaches, but Perseus's defensive position neutralized most of their options. Meanwhile, the Roman Senate was getting frustrated, demanding results. But Paulus stayed cautious. That's when Rome brought in a new guy, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, with one simple order. In this war, Rome fought very differently from the Greeks. Greek leaders often accepted negotiations or compromises. But Rome had one rule: total submission, no compromise, no gray areas. You either won completely or lost completely. This was the kind of challenge that showed just how good Paul was as a strategist. He wasn't just a general. He was a master at combining clever tactics with psychological moves to force the enemy into a fight on his terms. An experienced consul and commander, he was known for being careful and disciplined, personally training his troops, and earning a reputation for judgment, diligence, and skill, all of which he would put to the test during the Pydna campaign. His solution to the problem: knock Perseus off his unbeatable spot on the LPS River. But instead of attacking Hedon, a mistake earlier Roman commanders had made, Paulus played it smart. He sent a small force under Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Corculum on a flanking move along the coast, setting the stage for a decisive confrontation. A Roman deserter warned Perseus about the maneuver. So Perseus sent a large force to block the approach. But that's exactly what Paulus wanted. His plan worked, forcing Perseus to abandon his strong position and pull back north to Pydna to protect his supply lines. And that's when Perseus was finally forced to fight on open ground, a plain that was much less favorable for his army. Paulus' choice of battlefield near Pydna was pure strategic genius. The landscape there was rough and uneven. Not exactly the kind of place where armies usually want to fight. That actually worked in Rome's favor. The Roman manipular legions were super flexible and could handle rugged terrain much better than the Macedonian phalanx. The phalanx with its tight rows and ridiculously long spears needed flat ground to stay cohesive. On uneven ground, those long spear lines could easily break apart. By picking this terrain, Paulus wasn't just gaining a physical advantage. He was messing with Perseus' head. He forced Perseus into a corner. In order to protect his supply lines, the Macedonian king had to leave his strong position and fight on a field chosen by the Romans. It was a trap as much psychological as it was tactical. This move is a perfect example of the Roman way of war. Even when they weren't the most brilliant tacticians in every fight, they excelled at adapting, using every tool available, politics, logistics, psychology to tilt the odds in their favor. Paulus showed this brilliantly at Pydna, using a clever ruse to create the perfect conditions for his army. Moves like this are exactly why Rome kept rising as a superpower. But creating the perfect conditions was just the beginning. The Battle of Pydna is often seen as the ultimate showdown between two of the strongest military systems of the time. Rome's flexible Manipulians and Macedonia's nearly unstoppable fowls. Looking closely at the clash shows not just the strengths of each side, but also how outside factors could turn those strengths into deadly weaknesses. For centuries, the Macedonian phalanx was the ultimate symbol of military power, shaping the way wars were fought during the Hellenistic era. Developed by Philip II and perfected by his son Alexander the Great, the phalanx wasn't just a mass of soldiers. It was the beating heart of a proud empire. Its success was legendary, influencing infantry tactics and military strategy for generations. At its core, the phalanx was a dense block of infantry. Each syntagma had 256 men arranged in 16 rows of 16 designed to maximize offensive power while providing a solid defensive front. The tight formation encouraged teamwork and discipline, which were crucial for holding the line under pressure. Despite being made up of smaller units, the phalanx couldn't match the flexibility of the Roman legion. The secret weapon of the phalanx was the sarissa, a massive spear that could range from 13 to 20 feet in Alexander's time and even longer in later Hellenistic armies. Soldiers had to wield it with both hands, which meant they could only carry a small shield strapped around their neck. This gave the phalanx an incredible reach, allowing multiple rows to push forward at once, creating an almost impenetrable wall of spear points against traditional hoplites or shorter armed foes. It was devastating. But there's a catch. The sarissa's size also created critical weaknesses. At close range it was almost useless, and the small shield left soldiers vulnerable compared to a Roman scutum. The dense formation that made the phalanx so powerful also made it clumsy. Rotating, turning, or splitting units could cause chaos. Its specialization was a double-edged sword. Total dominance in the right conditions, but serious vulnerabilities if the enemy exploited them. The Macedonians' battlefield doctrine, often called the hammer and anvil, relied on the phalanx as the anvil to pin the enemy, while heavy cavalry, the hammer, struck from the flanks. But this plan demanded perfect coordination between units. Any misstep, rough terrain, or tactical trick could turn that invincible wall into a trap for itself. In short, the phalanx was a masterpiece of military engineering, but it had clear Achilles' heels. The phalanx was extremely vulnerable from the sides and the rear. It was cumbersome, hard to maneuver, and struggled to react quickly to unexpected threats. That one-dimensional style of fighting, normally a strength, could turn into a fatal weakness if the enemy played their cards right. In total contrast to the rigid specialized Macedonian phalanx, the Roman army represented a whole different philosophy: endurance, discipline, and adaptability. Their Manipulian system was built to be flexible and versatile. The Romans focused on standardization, strict discipline, and learning from the enemies they faced. Practical lessons that helped them improve with every campaign. This stark difference between the two military powers set the stage for an inevitable clash where each side's military doctrine would be put to the ultimate test. The Roman manipul system was revolutionary. A legion was broken into smaller semi-independent units called manipuls, usually around 120 men arranged in a checkerboard pattern. This decentralized structure gave Roman commanders a huge tactical advantage, letting them move and react efficiently across all sorts of terrain, a skill that had been key to conquering the Italian peninsula. Then there's how all their equipment worked together like a well-oiled machine. The pilum, their heavy throwing spear, was more than a weapon. It was a psychological shock tool. Launched just before the clash, it could pierce enemy shields, bending or jamming them and breaking formations. Modern analysis shows the effect came more from the spear's weight and narrow tip pinning the shield than any intentional bending. But either way it caused chaos in enemy ranks. The scutum, the large rectangular shield, wasn't just defensive. Roman soldiers used it to push and shove opponents, creating openings to exploit. And once the enemy's long spears were neutralized, the gladius, a short double-edged sword, became deadly in close combat, far more effective than the shorter Macedonian sword. But weapons alone weren't enough. Romans had a culture of discipline and persistence. Even a one-night halt meant building fortified camps, showing a level of organization the Macedonians rarely matched. Their chain of command allowed lower-ranking officers like military tribunes to make critical tactical decisions on the spot, a factor that would prove decisive in battles like Senecae. Here's the takeaway. While the phalanx was powerful in the right conditions, the Romans combined flexible formations, smart use of weapons, and a disciplined, adaptive army culture. And in this battle, all of these elements would be tested to the limit. The battle brought together two massive armies. On one side, the Romans had around 29,000 to 38,000 men, seasoned soldiers trained to fight as a highly disciplined, flexible unit, a mix of Roman legionaries, Italians, and allied troops. Cavalry was about 3,400 strong, and Paulus even had 22 war elephants contributed by African allies. He set up the Roman formation in classic style. 2 Roman legions anchored the center. Allied infantry held the flanks. Cavalry was split on either side and the elephants watched the right. Everything was positioned for maximum flexibility, ready to exploit any Macedonian misstep. On the other side, the Macedonians brought between 40,000 and 44,000 troops, the pride of a Hellenistic empire built on the legendary phalanx. At the heart of the Macedonian army, of course, was the phalanx, while lighter troops like mercenaries and Thracian infantry guarded the flanks. On the right, heavy cavalry, including the elite Sacred Squadron, personally commanded by Perseus, stood ready. The left had a 3,000-strong elite guard supporting the phalanx. Everything was meant to create an unstoppable force, at least in theory. Just seeing the two forces line up, you could tell this wasn't going to be a quick fight. Both sides were confident. Both sides had reason to believe in their strength. And what happens next is exactly why historians still talk about this fight. When the Macedonian phalanx began its initial push, the sheer sight of that tight wall of long spears moving forward struck awe even into the heart of experienced Roman generals. Pallas himself reportedly watched with horror and amazement as the phalanx advanced, its soldiers locked shoulder to shoulder, sarissas pointing forward like an unbroken forest of steel. The first Macedonian surge was a brutal display of power, and it immediately started to push back the Roman lines. Some of Rome's allies, already feeling the pressure, panicked and began to flee the battlefield. In that instant, the phalanx's legendary reputation seemed fully justified. But rather than trying to match the phalanx heat-in, Paulus made a withdrawal. The Romans fell back in an organized way, drawing the Macedonians further into terrain that wasn't suited to their strengths. The ground near Pydna was uneven, hilly, and anything but flat, and it would prove fatal to the phalanx cohesion. As the Macedonian soldiers pressed into the hills, their famously tight formation began to falter. Their straight lines, which had been almost invincible on flat ground, started to lose connection. Small gaps appeared in what was supposed to be an impenetrable wall of spear points. Paulus didn't wait a second. He saw the moment of opportunity and gave the order. His legions were to exploit those gaps immediately. This was the Romans' moment to shine. Their soldiers equipped with short swords, the gladius and heavy scudo were designed for close combat. And suddenly in the chaotic hills, these weapons became far more effective than the long cumbersome scissors of the Macedonians whose spears were nearly useless at close range. The light shields of the phalanx offered almost no protection against the thrusts and stabs of Roman swords. The maniple system of Rome, often praised for its flexibility, showed its full value here. The legions were broken into smaller units, maniples, which could act semi-independently. Some of these smaller groups and even tiny detachments infiltrated the phalanx from the sides and rear. What had seemed like a near-perfect wall of spears was suddenly vulnerable from multiple angles. Soldiers who had once felt untouchable were now fighting for their lives in a way their formation had never anticipated. The phalanx strength, its density and long reach became its greatest weakness in this terrain and at this moment. And just like that, the battle changed. What started as a terrifying display of Macedonian power now tilted in favor of the Romans. At close quarters, the two-handed scissors could not be brought to bear effectively. They were too long to swing or thrust with precision in the hilly, uneven terrain. Meanwhile, the Roman gladius and scutum combo proved devastating. One well-placed stab could take down a Macedonian soldier, while the shield provided both offense and defense. The Romans could punch, push, and stab with control, targeting weak spots that the phalanx simply could not cover. The momentum built quickly. The Romans pushed deeper into the gaps, the smaller manipular units working in coordination to fragment the phalanx further. Panic started to spread among the Macedonian ranks, especially when they realized their once unbreakable formation was being torn apart from all sides. The psychological impact was just as important as the physical fight. The Macedonian soldiers had been trained to trust in the phalanx cohesion, but now that trust was shattered in less than an hour. Yes, you read that right. Less than an hour, the entire course of the battle shifted. What had begun as a moment of fear for the Romans had flipped completely. The Macedonian formation collapsed under the Romans' relentless pressure, their soldiers falling in confusion or fleeing the battlefield. Looking at Pydna, one thing becomes crystal clear. The flexibility of the Roman legions, whether in organization, tactics, or mindset, was the game share. The Macedonian phalanx was a perfect war machine for ideal conditions. A force built to dominate on flat open ground. But the Romans, they were practical, adaptable, and willing to work with the messy reality of war. They didn't just march straight into the phalanx where it was strongest. No, they set the stage so the phalanx would show its biggest weakness all on its own. And while terrain and tactical flexibility were critical, sources also point to a big part of Macedonia's failure, Perseus himself. Traditionally, the Macedonian army relied on the hammer and anvil strategy. The phalanx acted as the anvil holding the enemy in place while heavy cavalry the hammer would smash the sides. But at Pydna, the cavalry, which was supposed to be the hammer, didn't really get involved. Some historians suggest it was almost a silent protest against Perseus by the Macedonian nobility. Others claim the king simply fled with his cavalry. Either way, leaving the phalanx flanks exposed was catastrophic. Those long sisses that were so deadly frontally could do nothing against a Roman legion attacking from the side or rear. And then there's Perseus's final failure. In the decisive moments, he fled the battlefield. The surviving Macedonian infantry who had fought to the death called him a coward. Meanwhile, the king and his cavalry escaped with almost no losses. This wasn't a case of a weak phalanx. It was a phalanx abandoned by its leader at the critical moment. Pydna shows that a system doesn't fail because it's outdated or inherently flawed. It can fail when leadership collapses or when a proud doctrine is applied in the wrong way. Lucius Aemilius Paulus' strategic patience and tactical skill clearly outshone a hesitant opponent in Perseus. But Roman success didn't rely solely on formations and planning. Psychological warfare played a big role too. From the shock effect of the pilum to the chaos caused when a Roman standard was thrown into the enemy lines, the Romans were masters at breaking both the enemy's formation and their morale. They knew that war wasn't just about weapons. It was about mind games as well. The results were staggering. Macedonian losses ranged between 20,000 and 25,000 men, while Roman casualties were under 1,000. That kind of one-sided slaughter sealed the fate of Macedonia as an independent kingdom. Payton marked the effective end of Macedonian independence and signaled the rise of Rome as the dominant military power in the Hellenistic world for centuries. So why does Pydna matter so much? It's a classic military lesson. Strategy and adaptability can overcome brute strength and rigid doctrines. The phalanx, for all its fame and terror, was essentially a perfect machine that needed ideal conditions. The Romans didn't try to fight it on those terms. They made it play on terrain and in circumstances where it would fail. And when leadership cracked, the unstoppable became vulnerable. Pydna isn't just a Roman victory. It's a story about planning, patience, and the brutal consequences when a proud army's strengths become its weaknesses. After Pydna, Rome didn't just win a battle. They sent a message. And they did it with style, psychological finesse, and a very calculated political hand. The way they treated King Perseus and Macedonia afterward wasn't random cruelty. It was a masterclass in power politics. Rome wanted the whole Hellenistic world to see one thing loud and clear. Cross Rome and you'll be utterly crushed. Pydna sealed the fate of Greek independence. Macedonia was no longer an independent kingdom. It became a Roman province. Instead of just annexing Macedonia outright, the Romans split it into 4 client republics, each isolated from the others. Citizens couldn't marry or own land outside their borders, cutting off any hope of reunification or rebellion. This wasn't just bureaucracy. It was strategy. Divide to rule. Make them weak and suspicious of each other. And you prevent a future uprising before it even starts. And then there was the ultimate humiliation for Perseus, the last of the Antigonid kings. He was paraded through Rome in chains during Paulus' victory procession. A very public reminder of Rome's absolute power. Imagine the guy once a descendant of Alexander the Great reduced to a cautionary tale. He would die in prison a few years later, but the spectacle of his defeat echoed across the Mediterranean, signaling a new era of Roman dominance. The phalanx, once the pinnacle of military might, showed its fatal flaw at Pydna. After Pydna, the phalanx, once the backbone of Macedonian warfare, essentially vanished from the battlefield, marking the end of an era in military history. Rome's prestige and wealth skyrocketed. The spoils from Macedonia were so vast that in 167 BC, Rome even cancelled direct taxes on its citizens. That financial independence meant Rome could keep expanding without straining its own people, a key factor in building an empire. So the legacy of Pydna isn't just a story of one battle. It's a lesson in how a rising power consolidates victory, projects authority, and ensures long-term control. Rome combined battlefield strategy, psychological warfare, and political maneuvering into a single unstoppable approach. Pydna didn't just end the independence of Macedonia. It signaled the decline of the Hellenistic era and the dawn of Roman domination across the Mediterranean. And that's why when we look back, Pydna is a turning point in history where the balance of power shifted forever. Thanks for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Pydna, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share it with your fellow history lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to Disturbing Tales so you won't miss our next episode. We've got another heroic battle coming your way. See you soon.